Well, Christiana Figueres was the United Nations climate chief who led the negotiations for the historic Paris Agreement back in 2015. She's now the convener of Mission 2020. That's an activist group committed to urgent climate action. Christiana Figueres joins me now from our studio in London. Nice to have you on the program. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you very much. Good evening, and thank you very much for the invitation.
I assume you heard what we just played in the introduction there, and some of Australia's politicians, including the Prime Minister, rebutting the findings of the climate change intergovernmental panel, particularly the issue of eliminating coal by 2050. How do you respond to what you're hearing from Australia?
Look, I think the importance of this report is that it goes much deeper into climate science. It gives us much more certainty, and it really examines the consequences of the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees. What you derive from that is the very clear conclusion that right now we are at a crossroads. As a humanity, we're at a crossroads in which we are deciding the future of humanity on this planet. That is collectively. From the Australian point of view, you are also deciding who you are. Never before have the Australian people been faced with such a momentous decision to decide who is the Australian people. Who are you? What is your identity? What do you stand for? And what do you want history to remember you by? And here are 3 questions that I think every Australian should ask yourself. Do you want bushfires raging across the East Coast for 6 months at a time? Or do you want a thriving and prosperous agricultural sector? Do you want to cause geopolitical instability because the Pacific Island nations will not be able to survive and will have to be forcibly migrating? Or do you want to open up your energy system to the limitless sources of wind and sun and be the cheapest energy source in the world? Finally, do you want the Great Barrier Reef, or do you want the largest aquatic cemetery in the world? Those 3 questions, I think, capture very clearly that Australian citizens are given now the opportunity to take a decision that no one can take for you. This is a decision of Australian citizens to decide who you are. And sorry, but this decision is one that I have been observing has been flip-flopping for the past 10 years in Australia.
I just want to come in on this point, because there has been a record of both sides of politics changing policy when it comes to this. But one thing we are hearing from both major parties is that coal, to some capacity, is going to remain part of the energy mix in Australia. Now, coal supplies the majority of Australia's energy. It is Australia's biggest export. It provides tens of thousands of jobs. Why would any Australian government sacrifice that when they say they can maintain that and also meet the Paris Accords?
You know, I think it is really a time to realize that for the coal industry as a whole, we have reached the Kodak moment. Coal simply does not have any space in the global energy system anymore. Australians need to really take a very hard look at this, and I know that it has been flip-flopping for 10 years. But the moment has come to make a decision.
We know that nations are still building coal-fired power stations. Australia has said, and the Prime Minister of Australia has said, that coal is going to remain part of Australia's energy mix. As I mentioned before, it is a significant export for Australia and provides jobs. To say that it doesn't have a place, how does that fit with the reality of what politicians are saying and facing in Australia, and the demand from Australian people for energy that is cost-effective, reliable and secure?
Because of the dependence of Australia on coal, both for its national energy system as well as for exports, it would be unreasonable to expect that Australia would completely demise its coal industry overnight. But to smoothly move out of the coal industry, both as energy source, because Australia has many other sources of energy, as well as a source of exports, Australia must be responsibly doing that. Otherwise, Australia is actually laying itself bare to have to undertake in 10 or 15 or maximum 20 years a complete devaluation of all of that coal. It is either take advantage of now the opportunity to smoothly and rationally move Australia out of its dependence, to be much more creative about its export portfolio, certainly replace that income that comes from coal, and replacing the energy in Australia should not be that difficult. In fact, you have proven that it's not that difficult because you are the country that has most solar panels in the world. So you are able to replace your own energy quite reliably with the energy that you have. The more challenging, of course, is replacing the export. But if you continue a dependence on coal, you will be facing a very dramatic loss of assets within maximum 20 years. Is that something that anybody wants to be responsible for?
The Prime Minister says that Australia can maintain its current energy mix, maintain its coal industry, and still meet its Paris commitments. That is 26 to 28% reduction of emissions on 2005 levels by 2025. Do you accept that?
And what we know, sorry.
Do you accept that?
And what we know is that
he can meet those commitments.
Yes, well, but what we know, whether it can or not, what we know is that the current commitments under the Paris Agreement are dramatically insufficient for what we need in order to stabilize the environment and, more importantly, in fact, stabilize the global economy and keep us away from abrupt changes, away from jumps to distress that would severely impact global economy and the Australian economy. So it's not just about can we be true to our Paris commitments, current Paris commitments. It is about, are we on target to be a globally and nationally carbon neutral economy by 2050? That requires much further effort than where we are right now. So to tell me that you can commit, you can actually do the Paris commitments, thank you, wonderful, not enough.
But here's one of the criticisms is that, first of all, countries were asked to sign on to the Paris Climate Accord to make those commitments, that was what was required. Now countries are being told, well, that's not going to be enough. 2% warming will be too much. We need to get that to 1.5%. Will there be another report in another couple of years that says 1.5% is not enough? The criticism here is that there is a constant harbinger of doom and a constant changing of what is required that makes it difficult to be able to chart a course.
Yes, well, that argument could be used by those who never read the Paris Agreement. Because if you read the Paris Agreement, it is quite clear in the Paris Agreement that countries committed to 2 degrees and to strive to 1.5. That was a very, very important part of the Paris Commitment. Furthermore, the Paris Commitment is actually built on a 5-year cycle of constant increase in emission reductions. So whatever is being achieved now from 2015 to 2020, which are the first 5 years of the Paris Agreement, but then in 2020, all countries are expected to come to the table and increase their ambition because the Paris Agreement is built on that 5-year cycle of increased ambition until we get to a carbon neutral economy in 2050. So no one can tell me this is a surprise. This is absolutely consistent with the science that we have always known and certainly with the international policy framework. No surprises here.
Here's another criticism, and this goes back to when the Paris Climate Agreement was signed, that the expectation of countries like Australia, the United States, Donald Trump has used this as part of his rationale for pulling out of the climate accord, is that countries like China were getting off more lightly, that China's commitments were going to be less than what was expected of countries like Australia or the United States, that a country like Australia that contributes, as we heard from the Prime Minister today, 1% of global emissions is being asked to contribute more than a country like China whose emissions dwarf Australia.
Well, sorry, but that's also a very infantile argument, because the fact is that no one forced anyone to take any type of commitments under the Paris Agreement. Every country did their own homework, consulted with all of their sectors, and came forward and put in what is called a nationally determined contribution.
But China wasn't being asked to make the commitment that other countries were being asked, and that's a reality, isn't it? China was being asked to provide 20% renewable energy as part of its energy mix by 2030 and to reach peak emissions capacity by that time, not the commitments that were being asked of, say, the United States or Australia.
No one asked either China or Australia or New Zealand or my own country, Costa Rica, to do anything. Everyone was asked to do their own homework and come forward with how they felt that they contributed to the global economy through national policy, through national benefits, through national interest. Because what is really, and so whatever China put in, they put in because they understood that it was be good for their economy. Whatever the United States put in, they understood they did it voluntarily. Nobody put the numbers there for them because they knew it was good for their economy. Same thing with Australia, same thing with Costa Rica, same thing with every single country. Nobody was given a little piece of paper that says you have to do 20, 30, 40, 50. Not true. Everybody did their own. It's called a nationally determined contribution. But in any event, here's the important part. We are arguing this because there's a prevalent myth that needs to be dispelled that addressing climate change is a huge burden. That is not true. What we totally understand now, and we didn't 10 years ago, is that addressing climate change actually is a huge opportunity. We now know that the global economy will grow by anywhere between $20 to $26 trillion just because we're moving to new technologies. We will be creating 65 million new jobs in a world where young people are really concerned about losing their jobs. 65 million jobs created because we're moving into a new sector, into a new technology, into a new energy system is actually a very good thing. So those who do not want to join this very important wave of modernization, those who want to stay in last century and not move into the 21st century with all the potential that has, will actually have to pay the consequences. They will not be as competitive as those countries that are moving forward, such as China and India.
Can I just get a final thought from you? With the warnings that we're seeing in this latest report, with the desire now to get to that 1.5 degree target, what does the US withdrawal from Paris do to the ability of the world to meet those targets? We have about a minute, sorry.
Well, you see, so there is a political reality, which is what the White House, the stand of the White House, but there's also the real economy reality. And that is the real economy of the United States is actually continuing to decarbonize. You have an increasing number of states, cities, corporations, financial institutions that continue to decarbonize their energy systems as well as their portfolios. Why? Because they understand that they want to have business that in the future, because they understand that it's good for their economy, that it's giving them jobs, that it's actually strengthening their GDP, and that's why they're doing it. So one thing is politics. Another thing is the real economy.
Christiana Figueres, again, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you.